and the 7 Dwarfs. It was the middle of winter, and the snowflakes were falling like feathers from the sky. A queen sat at her window, working, and her embroidery frame was of ebony. As she worked, gazing at times out on the snow, she pricked her finger, and from there 3 drops of blood oozed out and fell on the snow. When the queen saw how bright and red it looked, she said to herself, "I wish I had a child as white as the snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the embroidery frame." Not very long after, the queen had a baby daughter. Her skin was as white as the snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. The queen named her Snow White. But soon after the baby was born, the queen died. The little baby Snow White didn't get to see her mother, the queen. A year went by, and the king married again. The king's second wife was a beautiful woman, but she was too proud, and she could not bear to be surpassed in beauty by anyone. The new queen had a magic looking glass. She used to stand before it and look in it and say, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the looking glass would answer, "You, my queen, are fairest of them all." And she was content, for she knew that the looking glass spoke the truth. Time passed, and Snow White was growing prettier and prettier. When she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as day. She was far more so than the queen herself. So one day, when the queen went to her mirror and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" the mirror answered, "Queen, you are beautiful, it is true, but Snow White is more beautiful than you." The queen was shocked. She became green with envy, and from that moment her heart turned against Snow White, and she began to hate her. Envy and pride grew in her heart every day, until she lost all peace. At last, when she couldn't bear her jealousy, the queen sent for a huntsman. She said to him, "Take Snow White into the woods, so that I don't have to see her anymore. You must kill her, and bring me her heart for a token." The huntsman agreed and took Snow White to the forest. But when he drew his sword to pierce Snow White's heart, she began to weep. She said, "Oh, dear huntsman, do not take my life. I will go away into the wildwood and never come home again." Snow White was so little and lovely. The huntsman had pity on her. He said, "Go away then, poor child, and not let the queen see you ever again." The huntsman caught and killed a wild boar and took out his heart, which he showed to the queen for a token. The wicked queen thought that Snow White had died. After the huntsman left, Snow White found herself alone in the wild woods. She became afraid and did not know what to do. She was afraid of the forest animals. Then she had an idea. If she walks on sharp stones and through thorny bushes, her feet will hurt, but the wild animals will not follow her. She walked as long as her feet would carry her. When the evening drew near, she came to a little house. She opened the door and went inside. Everything in that house was very small. but it was very tidy and clean. There stood a little table covered with a white cloth, and 7 little plates, and 7 knives and forks and drinking cups. By the wall stood 7 little beds, side by side, covered with clean white quilts. Snow White was very hungry and thirsty. She ate from each plate a little porridge and bread, and drank out of each little cup a drop of water, so as not to finish up one portion alone. After her little tummy was full, she felt so tired that she lay down on one of the beds, but it did not seem to suit her. One bed was too long, another one was too short. At last, the 7th bed was quite right. So she lay down upon it and fell asleep. When the night fell, the masters of the house came home. They were 7 dwarfs, whose occupation was to dig underground among the mountains. When the dwarfs lit their 7 candles and the house filled with light, they realized that someone must have been in, as everything was not in the same order in which they left it. The first dwarf said, "Who has been sitting in my little chair?" The second said, "Who has been eating from my little plate?" The third said, "Who has been taking my little loaf?" The fourth said, "Who has been tasting my porridge?" The fifth said, "Who has been using my little fork?" The sixth said, "Who has been cutting with my little knife?" The seventh said, "Who has been drinking from my little cup?" Then the first one, looking around, saw a hollow in his bed and cried, "Who has been lying on my bed?" And the others came running and cried, "Someone has been on our beds too." Then the 7th dwarf looked at his bed. He saw little Snow White lying there asleep. Then he told the others, who came running up, crying in surprise, and holding up their 7 little candles to throw a light upon Snow White. "Oh goodness, oh gracious," they cried, "it's a small child." And they were so full of joy to see her that they did not wake her, but let her sleep on. When it was morning and Snow White woke up, she saw the 7 dwarfs and was very frightened. But they were quite friendly and asked her what her name was. "My name is Snow White," said Snow White in her frightened little voice. The dwarfs asked her how she came to be in their house. Snow White told them all about how her stepmother had wished her to be put to death, and how the huntsman spared her life, and how she walked the whole day until at last she found their little house. The dwarfs felt very sad and wondered what would happen to this little girl if they asked her to leave. They said, "If you will keep our house for us, and cook and wash and make the beds and sew and knit and keep everything tidy and clean, you may stay with us." I will, said Snow White. So Snow White stayed with the dwarfs and kept the house in good order. In the morning, the dwarfs went to the mountain to dig for gold. In the evening, they came home, and their supper had to be ready for them. All day, Snow White was left alone. The good little dwarfs warned her, "Beware of your stepmother. She will soon know you are here. Let no one into the house," they told Snow White. The queen, having been told that Snow White was dead, felt quite sure that now she was the most beautiful woman on the planet. So she came to her mirror and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the glass answered, "Queen, you are beautiful and fair, but a Snow White, who lives with the 7 little men, is 1,000 times more beautiful." The queen was very angry, for the glass always spoke the truth, and she knew that the huntsman must have deceived her. She thought and thought about how to kill Snow White. for she wanted to be known as the most beautiful woman in the world, and she was envious of anyone who could be called prettier than her. At last, the queen thought of a plan. She painted her face and dressed herself like an old peddler woman, so that no one would have known her. In this disguise, she went across the 7 mountains until she came to the house of the 7 little dwarfs. She knocked at the door and cried, "Fine wares to sell, fine wares to sell." Snow White peeped out of the window and said, "Good day, good woman. What have you to sell?" "Good wares, fine wares," answered the queen. "I am selling laces of all colors." And she held up a piece that was woven of silk. "I need not be afraid of letting this good woman in," thought Snow White. She opened the door and bought the pretty lace. "You are such a lovely child," said the queen, who was disguised as the old woman. "Come and let me tie your lace properly." Snow White, suspecting nothing, stood up before her and let her lace her with the new lace. But the old woman laced so quickly and tightly that it took Snow White's breath away, and she fell down as dead. Then the queen hurried away. Not long after that, towards evening, the 7 dwarfs came home and were terrified to see their dear Snow White lying on the ground. They raised her up, and when they saw how tightly she was laced, they cut the lace in two. Snow White began to draw breath, and little by little she returned to life. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said, "The old peddler woman was no other than the wicked queen. You must beware of letting anyone in when we are not here." When the wicked queen got home, she went to her glass and said, "Looking glass against the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the mirror answered as before, "Queen, your beauty is rare, but Snow White, who lives with the 7 little men, is 1,000 times more fair." When the queen heard this, she was struck with surprise, but she knew that Snow White must still be living. "I will think of a new plan to kill her," the queen decided. The queen made a poisoned comb. Then she dressed herself up to look like another different sort of woman. She went across the 7 mountains and came to the house of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door and cried, "Good wares to sell, good wares to sell." Snow White looked out and said, "Go away, I must not let anybody in." "But you are not forbidden to look," said the old woman, taking out the poisoned comb and holding it up. Snow White liked it so much that she was tempted to open the door. "Your hair is so messed up, I should comb it properly," the queen, dressed as the old woman, said. Poor Snow White, thinking no harm, let the old woman comb her hair. But as soon as the comb was put in her hair, the poison began to work. Poor Snow White fell down senseless. The wicked woman looked at Snow White and said, "This is the end of you," and then she went off. By good luck, it was now nearing evening, and the 7 little dwarfs came home. When they saw Snow White lying on the ground as dead, they thought that it was the stepmother's doing. They spotted the poisoned comb in her hair. When they drew it out, Snow White came to herself and told them all that had happened. The 7 dwarfs warned her again and told her to never again let anyone in at the door. When Queen went home and stood before the looking glass and said, "Looking glass against the wall, who is fairest of us all?" The looking glass answered as before, "Queen, your beauty is rare, but Snow White, living with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair. The queen heard the looking glass and shook with anger. Snow White shall die, she cried. Then the queen went to a secret chamber, and there she made a poisonous apple. It looked fresh and beautiful, so that anyone who should see it must long for it. When the apple was ready, the queen disguised herself like a fruit seller woman and went to where the 7 dwarfs lived. She knocked at the door. Snow White put her head out of the window and said, "I will not let anybody in." "All right," the woman answered, "just take one apple." "No," answered Snow White, "I will not take anything." "Are you afraid of poison?" said the woman. "Look here, I will cut the apple in 2 pieces. You shall have the red side, I will have the white one." The wicked queen had made the apple in a way that its red part was poisonous and the white wasn't. When Snow White saw the woman eating the apple, she felt hungry and agreed to eat the apple. As soon as she took one bite, she fell to the floor unconscious. The queen saw Snow White fallen on the floor and hurried away. This time, when the queen went home, she asked the looking glass, "Looking glass against the wall, who is fairest of us all?" At last, the looking glass answered, "You are fairest of them all." And the queen laughed a wicked laugh. When the dwarfs came home, they saw Snow White lying unconscious. They tried to revive her, but they couldn't. They were very sad and didn't know what to do. They lifted her up and laid her in a case of glass and sat around her worrying about how to wake her up. Snow White looked like she was sleeping peacefully, but whatever the dwarfs tried, they couldn't wake her up. Time passed and passed, and Snow White kept sleeping. One day, a brave boy rode through the woods and up to the dwarfs' house. There he saw a case made of glass in which slept Snow White. The boy suggested that the dwarfs take Snow White to this place he knows, where all kinds of rare illnesses are treated. The dwarfs agreed. When they were taking the case on their shoulders, they stumbled upon a bush. With all the shaking, the poisonous apple in Snow White's throat came out and she woke up. "Oh dear, where am I?" she asked, surprised. Everyone was so happy to see her. That day, the wicked queen dressed herself in beautiful clothes and went to her looking glass and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" The looking glass answered, "A young girl who has just woken up after a long sleep." And the queen knew that Snow White has woken up. She was angry and didn't know what to do. She tried so hard to harm Snow White, but there she was, still safe and well. The wicked queen cried and cried, and she knew that she would never be happy because she was so jealous of anyone better than her. Far, far away, Snow White was healthy and happy, and she spent the rest of her time with the 7 dwarfs and the new friend she had made. So kids, this was the story of Snow White. What did you learn from this story? Snow White's story tells us that jealousy and vanity won't take us very far, but kindness and truth will. Hope you enjoyed this story. We will meet again soon with a new and entertaining story. Till then, take care and be happy.